Hey, how you doing? Justin here, continuing our guitar tone adventure, hoping that you've already seen the video where we talked about all of the different sounds in the guitar and how important it is to be thinking about what pickup you're using and the tone control and the volume control and how to manipulate those things to get your sound. Today is going to be about an amplifier and what the settings are on an amplifier, how you adjust them and stuff like that. Now, you'll see here I'm using this, looks like a toaster thing. This is called a Kemper Profiler, and it can sound like lots of different amplifiers, and herein lies the first problem for somebody who's really new to guitar sound, and that is different amplifiers can sound very, very different. So a Marshall sounds very different to a Fender, it sounds very different to a Vox, and at the beginning you're unlikely to know what those differences are, like to recognize the sound on a record and go, that sounds like a Marshall, or that sounds like a Fender, or that sounds like a Vox, that sounds like a Dumble, these different amp types. So my suggestion right at the beginning, if you're really new to the whole guitar adventure, would be to get some sort of device that has lots of different guitar amp sounds within it. Boss Katana is a really good budget one if you're just starting out, but there are loads of people doing this sort of amp sim now. Fractal, the famous Axe Effects, a company called Torpedo of French guys, do some fantastic amp sims and speaker sim stuff. Neural DSP. There are loads of companies now making guitar amp simulators for phones and iPads and full computers. Of course, you need some sort of interconnecting device, an audio interface to be able to plug into something like that to use them. But anything like that where you've got a range of different sounds to explore at the beginning is a really good idea. Probably you'll find eventually that you like a particular thing. So I tend to like kind of silver face Fender or black face Fender sounds. I know I'm quite specific about it. For me, actually, I settled on my favorite of all time is just behind me here, the Tone King Imperial. For me, that is the same as that kind of Fender sound, but it just seems to refine it in a way that I really, really like. However, my day-to-day guitar playing is nearly always through the Kemper because it can sound like lots of different things. If I'm doing a rock thing, I can dial in a Marshall. If I'm doing a clean guitar sounding thing or a country thing, I can pull up a Fender. If I'm doing a bluesy thing, I can grab a Dumble. I mostly use profiles by a guy called Michael Britt. The Kempers for sure aren't cheap, but it's unlikely you're going to need anything else. Right, so I use it for all of the recording now. Occasionally, if I'm doing a kind of a serious recording project, I'll grab the amps out, but grabbing an amp and a microphone and plugging it into a preamp and setting it all up and getting the right compression, there's so many steps there compared to just turning a little knob here to choose a different amp. It really is an incredibly versatile tool. I'm not endorsed by Kemper at all. I've got two Kempers. I've paid retail for both of them. It's like it's just I think a fantastic tool, and it's made my life doing what I do, both recording and doing tuition videos, incredibly easy. Big up to Michael Britt. Nearly all of the profiles I use are made by this one guy. For me, easily the best Kemper profiler maker. So definitely worth a look. So, long and short of it, get some sort of device that you can try out a load of different amps on to see what it is you like, and then maybe down the line when you really know what you like, you'll buy that type of amplifier, or maybe you'll be happy with the convenience that using some sort of simulator gives you. The good news is that pretty much all of them have the same controls. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about gain, we're going to talk about bass, middle, treble, and presence, and we're going to touch a little bit on reverb. I'm not going to go deep into the effects. That's going to be another video where I'm going to start talking about the different effects type and how to spot what those are and how to be able to control the settings for those things as well. So okay, I'm going to start here with one of the Brit profiles I really like. It's 1969 Marshall, probably a Plexi. This is the sound just straight out of the box, as it were. Fairly crunchy, kind of a rocky sound, right? Now, on the Plexi, just like a regular amp, we can change the gain setting. So gain is how much distortion we've got, and if I turn that right down, you hear it's very different sounding. Now, when you've got a cleaner sound, you're going to be able to play open chords more. So this kind of... wouldn't want to do that with loads of gain. So if I go at the other end of the extreme and I'm turn the gain right up, it just tends to sound really murky and muddy. I'm not really feeling that much at all. Hopefully the noise gate's not on. No, it's not on. Sometimes the noise gate on this on these amps, I hate the sound of it, but the gain is really, really powerful. And when you're listening to a record, it's one of the things, no matter what amp you've got, what sort of amp's in, you want to think about how much gain it's got. And generally I err on the side of less. So if I'm hearing it, like particularly AC/DC, people tend to use too much gain when they're playing AC/DC songs. So whatever it is, that the settings that you're after, have a listen to it and then maybe just back it off a bit and try and play it like that. Do remember as well that you can clean up using your volume control. We talked about that in the guitar controls lesson. So my volume back. Now this one I have to turn it down quite a lot to be able to get this particular sound to clean up. It works differently with different profiles, just like different amps clean up differently, different profiles clean up differently as well. So yeah, gain's a really big deal. Again, you have to experiment. Every amp is different. Every different profiler is different. So you really need to figure out your own gear and see how it's working, how much gain you get out of the different things. And you got to experiment. Part of the journey of learning to recognize a tone on a record and then trying to emulate it, or find a sound in your head and then be able to realize to make your guitar sound like what you imagine it to sound like, is experimentation. Right? There's not a rule book here, and because all of the gear is so different, unless you're getting a specific profile or a patch for a particular amp, if you've got a Boss Katana, you can go to their Tone Central, I think it might be called, where you can download specific sounds, and it should sound the same on every different amplifier. That's a really useful thing. And again, if you get a Marshall one of those and a Fender one of those, you'll probably start to get a bit of a feeling for what those different things are like. I don't think the Boss ones are as accurate as the kind of the Kemper style ones, but it's still going to get you in the ballpark for a lot less money. So let's talk about these other common knobs. So gain, really common. Bass is obviously a really big deal. Now, if I turn the bass right up, probably doesn't sound that different, particularly if you've got headphones on, to what it did roughly in the middle. But if I turn the bass off, like as little as possible, you hear it sounds really different. So bass is important. Interestingly, when you're doing a record, you very often lose a lot of the bass on the guitar sound anyway, because it gets in the way of the bass guitar, and you want separation in your different sounds. So when you're recording, very often you cut the bass anyway in EQ. So bass for me is about my listening experience as much as anything. So when I'm recording, I'm probably going to pull a lot of it out anyway. So that's just about getting a sound that I'm happy with, that I like in my ears. Particularly if you're playing on your own, you probably want a decent amount of bass. Now, middle is the kind of the next zone up. So if you think of it in terms of frequency spectrum, bass is the low sounds, the really deep sounds. Middle is the middle sounds, and top is the very high, crispy sort of sounds. And we have presence a step higher than that as well. A really useful thing, if you happen to have access to it, if you've got a DAW, a digital audio workstation, and you can get up an EQ, which actually shows it as a line where you can drag the line up and down to boost the bass and the middle and the top frequencies. So you get some sort of idea of what the different frequency ranges are and how they affect the sound. That can be a really useful experiment, just to record your guitar without touching anything and then go into the program, the computer program, and muck around and get a feeling for what it sounds like when you boost 1K, or whether you cut from 100 hertz down, and you get used to what these different kind of frequencies are like. Really, really useful exercise, and definitely something I'd recommend as well. Give you a better visual perspective of what's going on here when you do that. So middle, so looking at the middle now, it's the middle is the middle right up, it's the middle right out. Now, middle is pretty important. Middle is the part that cuts through of your guitar sound. So very often if you want to make your guitar sound louder in a band, what you want to do is boost the middle, not the overall sound. If you turn the whole volume up, you'll just get annoying, and again, like the bass frequencies of your guitar are going to upset the bass player and sound guy will get upset. But if you boost just the middle range of your guitar, it'll cut through a little bit more. So the mids are really important. A lot of real heavy metal stuff tends to, like especially the kind of 90s metal, they did a thing called a scooped mid, where they'd turn the bass up, turn the treble up, and then turn the middle down. That kind of sound was a real popular one. Again, boosting the bass, boosting the treble, and then cutting the middle. But it didn't cut through very well, and often on those records they did loads and loads of layers of different guitars playing the same thing in order to give it a lot of weight, whereas because it's the mid that was taken out there. Interesting thing, tube screamer pedals as well, they're very mid focused. When you put a tube screamer on, it kind of boosts the middle frequency in a really nice way, which is why those pedals are so popular. You'll find all of these controls on the pedals as well. So you've got controls on your amp, which you want to adjust, and then as you start to get a pedal collection of different types of distortion, which will change the sound drastically, then you've got another set of tone controls, which you're going to worry about. Sometimes you just have one control, by the way, called tone, and you'll find that turning it one way will make the bass sounds louder, and turning it the other way will make the treble sounds louder. But again, then you've only got one knob. You should just experiment with it and get used to what it sounds like, so you know, oh, I want my guitar to sound more bassy, so you turn it to the left or whatever, anti-clockwise, and hopefully you get more bassy. But that should be a bit of an easier gig there if you've only got one control. You'll often find too that sounds have a sweet spot. I often find when I'm experimenting with an amp that, particularly real amps more so than the profilers, but I'll just experiment with each control all of the way in each extreme and find one point where it seems to make the biggest amount of difference to the sound, and then I'll drop it in around there. That'll be the point that at least as a starting point again. But a lot of it is experimentation and getting to know your gear. I can't say it often enough. When you get a new guitar, a new amplifier, a new pedal, really spend some time digging into it. Don't expect to get an amazing result straight away. You want to get to know it. Figure out where its best positions are, and what it's good for, where you might use it, where you wouldn't, So yeah, middle's a good one. You don't want it to be too middly. It gets a little bit honky. Again, it'll depend on the speakers as well. I've got this Kemper just running through these tiny little Genelecs, which is my little setup where I'm recording, but I've got another recording studio bit with big focal speakers over down there. So sometimes I'll get a sound here and think it's really cooking, and then I'll go over and listen on the main studio. Oh, wasn't really happening. So you've got to get to know your monitoring environment as well. I know these little speakers fairly well. I've been using them for a couple of years, but still, it's very different to having a guitar amp in the room with you as well. So that's enough about middle. Now on to treble. Now treble is a very kind of easy one to get a grasp of what it's doing. If I turn treble off, it's like that thing I talked about with the guitar. It sounds like somebody's closed the door. They're practicing guitar in another room. And you're really annoying them and you open the door. It sounds like that, and you tell them to shut up, and then you close the door again. Maybe they're still just playing as loud as they were before. So treble all the way off. It's like you've got socks over your ears or something. A lot of the bite of the sound has disappeared. Too much bite, too much treble. It doesn't sound terrible here with these particular speakers, but it's definitely going to be too bright, too sharp and crispy. So you've got to be careful with the treble. Again, every different amp is different. They boost different frequencies. So you need to experiment with your gear. It's a really big deal. Now, this one also has a presence control. Presence is higher than treble. There is the presence regular. I'm just doing the extreme so you can hear them. Off often you're going to get like wasp in a jam jar thing. If you've got your treble and your middle up too high and no bass, it just sounds real scratchy and horrible. So you do need to be careful of that stuff. Again, it's just listening. You know, at the end of the day, all of this stuff that I'm talking about is going to be you listening to the sounds that you're making and then experimenting with your gear to see what it is that sounds nice. If we turn the presence right down, it's a little bit like turning the treble off, except more extreme. There's treble off. Here's presence off. It's kind of similar here. If I remember correctly, those old plexis don't have a presence control. Hang on, he says, does it have a presence control? It does have a presence control, but it's first below the bass. It's presence, bass, middle, treble, volume 1, volume 2 on that old Marshall there behind me. So actually, yeah, completely wrong. That old Marshalls do have a presence control. But yeah, again, sometimes you'll find that the controls function differently on different amps. So they kind of have a different bearing. I'm trying to think if the... no, that one doesn't have a presence. Actually, most of my other amps don't have a presence. Yeah, the old Sir behind me, power, drive, bass, middle, treble, gain. The Lazy J just has volume and one tone control that you turn around, and one of them's a push-pull for a mid-boost. So yeah, different amps are going to have very different settings, and you're going to have to explore them on your own. The other thing that's really common on amps, at least amps that I buy, is reverb. So I'm just going to pop the reverb setting on here. If I turn the mix right up, it's a little bit little, and I haven't got my glasses on, so I'm having trouble reading the thing, but you can hear there, and I'll turn the delay time right up as well. Turn everything up so you can really hear the... Okay, it sounds like you're in a cave. Now, I am definitely a reverbaholic. Have been most of my life. I've always loved the sound of reverb. Rarely do I buy amps that don't have reverb. That's not true. Actually, loads of the amps I've got behind me don't have reverb. But I would always prefer to play where I can hear reverb. If not, I'll definitely be adding it on later in the studio. Quite often producers will want you to play without reverb so they can add their own reverb on later on, because in a recording studio you've probably got access to better quality reverbs than you might have built into your amplifier, which are usually a thing called spring reverb, which are actually metal springs in a box that if you've got spring reverb in your amplifier and you bash the top of your amplifier, it sounds like thunder. That's the springs rattling around in their metal box. Always a good trick when you're doing a gig and you want to upset everyone. But the effect of reverb is it kind of makes it sound like you're in the room a little bit, which it can make it feel nicer when you're playing. When you don't have reverb, you would call the sound very dry. Okay, and when you put the reverb on, you would describe it as getting wet. A wet sound has more effects, more reverb and delay usually. So that feeling changes how you feel. That sound changes how you feel when you play, and that's why very often those kind of effects are useful to have on there when you're practicing on your own. It feels more it feels more natural, which doesn't make sense because it should feel natural without it. But there is something about it's putting the guitar sound in an environment. You definitely don't want to overdo reverb. I have been probably guilty of doing that a number of times, but generally speaking, too much reverb can get makes all of the sound a little bit murky. Again, there are lots of different types of reverb. This one has tons of different reverbs built in. Most amplifiers will just have a reverb control for the amount of reverb that you have on. If you want to get more into reverb and you buy a nice reverb pedal, then you're going to find lots of different parameters. If you go into something like this, you've got tons and tons of different types of reverb. You got like studio style plate reverbs and halls and cathedrals, so they emulating the sounds of different spaces. Like if you put your guitar amp in a cathedral, this is what it would sound like. Plate reverb is metal plates bringing together, not like you would put your guitar on a plate and play it. But the names are usually descriptive of how those sounds were there. Like a spring reverb is the one generated by those springs in the back of an amplifier, which is the most common type of reverb that you'll find on an amplifier if it's built in. So the long and short of this, hopefully that's given you a bit of an understanding of what the controls do. But, I'm going to say it one more time. You've got to try out your own gear. You've got to take your guitar and your amplifier and experiment. Give yourself like a half an hour block and do nothing but muck around with the controls on your amp. Just try stuff. What happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? Can I use the front pickup, which has got a fatter, rounder sound, and then turn the treble up on the amp? Does that work? I don't know exactly if it's true, but there's a Jeff Beck thing apparently where he turns the tone control down for the bridge pickup and then boosts it on the amplifier, so that when he goes on the front pickup, it doesn't sound quite so dark, so it still sounds bright enough. So that's that's an interesting and very kind of, I'm not aware of that many other guys that do that, but it's definitely effective. He's one of the, he's got some of the best tone of anyone. It's definitely a never-ending quest, the sound that you want, that, guys like Eric Johnson that have got incredible tone, like really, really obviously fine-tuning the detail on stuff like that. And you will find that it's a journey that kind of doesn't end. There's no end of minutiae of rabbit holes that you can go down, and reviews of pedals that you can watch to see if you want to get this distortion or that distortion, and does this cable sound better than that cable, and should you be using true bypass or not true, or buffered, or what. There's all of these things, but they're really the minutiae. And particularly, I'm assuming that your early days in your guitar tone journey, so you just want to be thinking about the basic stuff. What does the treble do? What does the middle do? What does the bass do? What does gain do? How much gain do I want? How does it react and interact with the settings that I got on my guitar? Having more gain on the amp, less gain on the guitar, the other way around. What do the different amps sound like? Can I learn the difference between the sound of a Fender, a clean Fender sound, very bright, crispy, shiny sort of thing, and a Marshall with crunch, or that voxy, middly kind of tone? Like how are they different? Learning to recognize them will be really helpful when you're playing that song and you're going, oh, I really want to play this Gary Moore song. How do I get that sound? I go, oh, I don't know. Look up some pictures. Say, oh, there he is with a Les Paul and a Marshall. Maybe that's the way to do his sound. Maybe it's not. That's maybe a bad example. I'm not exactly sure what gear he uses. It's a very rough gear. Definitely Les Paul, but not sure about the Marshalls. Anyway, you get the idea. Doing a little bit of visual research can help you, but most importantly is trying out your gear. If you can, some sort of device where you've got access to different types of amplifiers that you can experiment with, and then hopefully your ear will pick up the sounds that you like, and you can further refine the sound that you want to become your sound further on down the line. Really hope you enjoyed this. Like I said, if you haven't seen the lesson about the guitar sounds, I'd definitely recommend that you check that out, and stay tuned for more about guitar effects and how we're going to use it and recording and all of that sort of stuff. This is part of the grade 3 lessons over on justinguitar.com. If you haven't been over there for a while, go and check it out. There's loads of awesome stuff. Practice assistance. We've got tabs now. We've got all sorts of stuff going on. So hopefully you'll pop over and enjoy that stuff if you're not there already. I'll see you for plenty more very soon. Have yourselves a fantastic day. You take care. Bye-bye.